Hello everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Gooey's Dungeon Dive, the podcast where I, Gooey, rank every dungeon in The Legend of Zelda, and we are continuing our journey through Link's Awakening. After retrieving the Full Moon Cello, we leave Tail Cave and once again encounter the owl, who remarks, "That is an instrument of the sirens. I have to admit, at first I did not believe you were real. That instrument, along with the 7 others in the set, has the power to wake the windfish. You must collect them all." He then directs us to Gapanga Swamp in the north, but our trip is immediately interrupted. A gang of moblins has dog-napped Bow Wow from Madame Meow Meow, a resident in the village. We must journey to the moblins' hideout to rescue poor Bow Wow. After tussling with the leader of the Moblin bandits, we retrieve the big dog, I guess you could call it. Madame Meow Meow is pleased with us and asks us to take Bow Wow on a walk. His favorite place to go walking happens to be in the swamp. When we go walking in the swamp with the faithful Bow Wow, we now have access to the entrance of Level 2, Bottle Grotto. So we're continuing our shape theme from the original Legend of Zelda here with Bottle Grotto, which takes the shape of a bottle. And this is pretty unique, and it comes back in a couple of ways throughout the dungeon. Honestly, in more ways than, like, Tails do in Tail Cave, I guess. It's a quirky theme for sure. And the dungeon itself, it has a music theme that is also, it's similar to Tail Cave in that it's very reminiscent of the more traditional Zelda dungeon tune, like a lot of the dungeon tunes we've had have been. But it's another pretty good one. I guess another thing I didn't really touch upon is I love that it's all like all the entrances of the dungeons you come in, they say level 1, level 2. Like that's another kind of throwback. It does have sort of a dungeon feel of the original Legend of Zelda, which I think is neat. Again, another theme that's carried over throughout the game and the dungeons is this abundance of like Mario enemies. We had Bow Wow, which is basically a chain chomp to even get into the dungeon, and this dungeon has Shy Guys, and it's got Boos, and it's got an underground section with piranha plants coming out of pipes. And I think even that music in all the underground areas kind of reminds me of like the original underworld theme of like the Mario Brothers, where it's like dum dum dum. That's a bad vocal impression of it, but if you're hearing it, you know what I mean. The dungeon to me feels it's a little less complex in design, I think, than Tail Cave probably. In the beginning of it, there's like a handful of keys you can all grab right away. Like once again, you can be holding a bunch. You probably won't if you're playing it more naturally. But I like that there's definitely a lot of options. There's all these like little offshoots that you can spend them on, to spend the keys on to get stuff like the map or whatever. One minor offshoot you can go down will lead you to the Stone Beak, which the first hint that you can get from the first statue you would encounter it's not like world changing. It just tells you how to use those like crystal switches that we're seeing return from A Link to the Past. I think later on it definitely offers, there's definitely a more like hint of the dungeon that it offers. That's a more standout hint. But I guess potentially you could, not be able to get past or not totally understand how that crystal switch works and then, be blocked off that way. But I'm going to say I doubt it. Otherwise, I think the path forward remains fairly linear. You'll be blocked by something like an obstacle requiring the dungeon item, or maybe like, the nightmare key to get into the boss room. And there's like a minor task to obtain whatever to progress. Granted, if you get by the first Stone Beak puzzle just fine without it, which is, that's very doable, you can go further into like the path to the final boss, and then not understand how to get the nightmare key, and then you'd have to backtrack to go get the stone beak for, for that hint. And I guess that could, that could make the dungeon feel a little bit more complex and difficult. The dungeon item here builds off the theme of the dungeon. Once again, it is in fact the power bracelet, which allows you to lift heavy items. In this dungeon's case, it allows you to lift heavy pots or bottles that are blocking your path in the dungeon. It's a little less exciting, I think, than Rock's Feather. Like, definitely getting the ability to jump is way more exciting than lifting things. I don't know if that's ever really been that exciting. It's definitely not really ever in A Link to the Past, other than, you've had all these different gates that you can now pass by being able to lift these objects that you couldn't before, which I think is a useful tool in, like, kind of, separating things, acting as another key to another area. But on its face, it's not really that exciting. It's not really too fun ever here in this dungeon either, but it gets the job done. So this then, like I said, it gets us to what I would consider like the real stone beak puzzle of the dungeon, which is a room where there are 3 enemies that you have to kill in a particular order to make the chest for the nightmare key appear. Luckily, if you don't remember the hint, this room has an underground passage that's now accessible that leads back to the room with the owl statue. And it's, now that we have the power bracelet, we can lift the pots that were blocking the steps to get out and, move back and forth between these locations. And then even further, I guess if you forgot the stone beak, you would, at this point, would have encountered just a couple rooms away, or a room away, I think, the mini-boss in the Hynix, he's kind of a fun little guy. I like the Hynix, but it's, we've got this warp that is created after you beat him. We've got the mini-boss warp, so you can warp back to the entrance, which is closer to the stone beak location. So you almost have what I feel like is kind of like this linear path that you can now, like, through various means, skip a bunch of the rooms, But if you don't know, if you're not really paying attention to the map like that, especially because you move around different areas of this bottle and you don't have the layout fully memorized, it can feel more complex than honestly it really is. But there you go. Like, we have sort of that's kind of the theme of this dungeon, I guess. So once you get the nightmare key, you're now, accessible to be able to get to the boss. There's a nice little underground puzzle where you have to hold a pot to stand on a platform that you're not heavy enough to move down. Kind of a cute little thing. But the boss itself is Genie, who is one of the more unique Zelda bosses in the series, I would say. He's kind of one of the first ones to really have some personality. Moldorm buzzed at us, called us an outsider or whatever. But Genie here, we get a little bit of dialogue with him. He says something like, "I am your bad guy this time," which sort of hints at some self-awareness that this game has that I like. And of course, keeping with the bottle theme, he is a genie in a bottle. He throws some fireballs at you, and then goes in a bottle where we can attack, and it won't do anything to him, and he'll taunt us, and he'll say something like, "Nah, nah, nah, you can't get me when I'm in my bottle." But of course, we've got this, we're starting to establish this formula of, use the item you got on the boss, and you can lift up his bottle and smash it against the wall and eventually break him out of it. This gets him hopping mad, as he says, and his attacks get a little bit more fierce. But now he's vulnerable to the sword. You can hit him when he appears. I feel like this can be kind of a tough boss for a new player, especially because you don't have a lot of hearts at this moment. But that's just me. I don't know how other people felt about that, but overall, pretty unique, kind of fun boss. But even his fight, I'm not too interested in it. I think it's okay, but I kind of hate waiting for. It's not a long time, but like waiting to hear him taunt and text. It's kind of fun, but it's not the most thrilling fight, I'll say. After we slayed Genie, we're able to progress to the next chamber where we get the conch horn. I love the conch horn. Again, we play another beautiful, haunting melody on this thing, and we're absorbed completely in the white light, and we hear the message, "Prairie, prairie, the prairie is waiting." And of course, we have there a next little tease of what's to come. Yeah, so there we go. Pretty fun dungeon, I would say. Not my favorite, but we'll bring up the ranking here. I definitely, I've always thought this dungeon's kind of okay. Like I said, the layout, it doesn't drive me wild. I think the bottle theme is quirky, but it doesn't really excite me or anything. I do appreciate this dungeon in the game. I think it's good. I do appreciate it a lot less than Tail Cave, honestly. It's sort of a decent second dungeon. I think I've kind of said the things I'm kind of mixed about. I definitely will put it below Tail Cave. I appreciate the thematic natures of Turtle Rock, Ice Palace, and Thieves Town more than this dungeon. Honestly, Death Mountain is pretty epic, pretty classic. Same with the Great Palace. I think it's somewhere in the mix here with these Light World ones. Oh man, I don't know. Maybe even lower. Like I said, it is linear, and I think like Eastern Palace too is more, but I appreciate how it weaves you from room to room. I don't know. It's really, for me, a matter of whether it's... I definitely like Desert Palace more. I think Desert Palace is pretty cool. Eastern Palace is pretty cool as well. Oh, man. Yeah, I think I'm going to put Bottle Grotto just below Eastern Palace. Like I said, there's nothing really inherently wrong with it. In fact, it's kind of an interesting way to do a dungeon that actually has sort of a forward progression path. And it's good to have the variety in a game too. So like, don't get me wrong. You know, I love Eastern Palace, and I love the snake, actually. Like, part of me wants to put the snake above it, though. Yeah, I don't know if I could honestly do that. But, yeah, so I think this is a good place for it. I like other dungeons in this game way more, but this is a solid one, you know, continuing the game strongly, I think. And we're probably going to see Link's Awakening kind of all over the map anyway, because it's, like I said in the last video, it's shorter, has less dungeons, it's got to get some of its points across more quickly, I guess. So, yeah, there it is. Bottle Grotto, number 16, just below Eastern Palace. I think that's fine. Yeah, thanks everyone for following along again, and I will see you next week for Key Cavern.